The morning I signed away my own house to my daughter-in-law, I was smiling. She thought she'd won. She had no idea what was already folded inside the envelope I'd slid under the seat of the truck she was about to drive off in. But to understand why a 71-year-old widow would hand over the deed to the house her husband built with his own hands, you need to know what they did to me first. You need to know the whole thing, start to finish, the way it actually happened. My husband died on a Tuesday in October. 46 years we were married. 46. People say that number to me like it's supposed to be a comfort, like it's a long time, and it is. But it also isn't. It went by like a single afternoon. One day we were 23 and broke and painting the kitchen of a fixer-upper outside Fort Wayne, and the next I was sitting alone in that same kitchen, older than my own mother ever got to be, holding a casserole dish a neighbor brought over that I would never in 1,000 years be able to eat. His name was on everything. The truck, the savings, the deed, the little life insurance policy we'd kept paying into since the Carter administration. And for the first 3 months after the funeral, I didn't touch any of it. I couldn't. I'd open the laptop to deal with the bank and just sit there with my hands in my lap. The grief wasn't loud the way you'd think. It was quiet. It was the dishwasher running for one person. It was buying a head of lettuce and watching it go bad in the crisper drawer because there was nobody left to help me eat it. My son lived 2 hours away, up near the lake. He came to the funeral, of course. He cried, he hugged me, he said all the right things, and then he went home to his wife, and I didn't hear from him for 11 days. I counted. I'm not proud that I counted, but I did. Now, I want to be fair to him, because I've had a lot of time to think about how all this started, and I don't think a person turns cruel overnight. I think it happens in small pieces, and I think I handed him some of those pieces myself. I raised him to believe the world owed him a soft landing. His father and I both did. We grew up with nothing, and we swore our boy would never want for a single thing, and somewhere in all that giving, we forgot to teach him how to give back. That's on me. I'll own my share of it. I just didn't know how big my share of it. I just didn't know how big my share was until it was almost too late. The first sign came in the spring. I'd finally started crawling out of the fog a little. I'd joined a Tuesday morning coffee group at the church, mostly other widows, and one of them, a sharp little woman who used to teach high school chemistry, said something that stuck with me. She said, "Honey, you spent 46 years being somebody's wife. You've got maybe 20 good ones left being your own self. Don't waste them being sad in that big empty house." That night I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and I made a list. Things I'd never done. Things I'd always said someday about. And right at the top, in my own handwriting, I wrote, "Drive to the ocean." I'd never seen it. 46 years married to a man who hated long car trips, and I had never once stood at the edge of the Atlantic and put my feet in the water. It seemed insane that a whole life could go by without that. The truck wouldn't make it. It was 16 years old and the transmission slipped on hills. So I did something that, to me, felt enormous. I went down to the dealership on the highway by myself in my good blouse and I bought a car. A real one. Not the cheapest thing on the lot either. A clean little SUV, silver, with heated seats and a backup camera and a sunroof because at 71 I had decided I wanted to feel the sun on my head while I drove. I paid for a good chunk of it outright from the life insurance and financed the rest. I signed my own name on every line. Mine. Not his and mine, just mine. I cannot tell you the feeling of driving that car off the lot. I cried a little, sitting at the first red light, but it wasn't sad crying. It was the other kind. The kind you don't get to do very often when you're old and everyone's already decided who you are. I made the mistake of being happy out loud. That's really what set it all off, if I'm honest. I called my son that evening, giddy as a girl, and I told him, "I bought myself a car," I said. "A brand new one. I'm going to drive to the ocean this summer." There was a pause on the line. I remember the pause. And then he said in a voice that was already not quite his own, "You bought a car? With what money?" I should have heard it then. The accountant tone, the taking inventory of a living person's assets. But I was too pleased with myself, so I just laughed and said, "With my money, sweetheart, your father left me well enough. Don't you worry about your old mum." He came down that Saturday, without calling first, which he never did. And he didn't come alone. His wife came with him. Now, I'd never been close with her. I'll leave it at that for the longest part of this story, because I want you to make up your own mind. She was always polite to me in the way you're polite to a piece of furniture you inherited and can't figure out how to get rid of. Pleasant, cool, always counting. When my husband was alive, she kept her distance, kept her opinions behind her teeth. But he was gone now, and I think she sensed the fence was down. They sat in my living room, the one with the wedding photos on the wall, and my son did the talking while she sat beside him with her hands folded, nodding like she was at a meeting. "Mom," he said, "we've been worried about you." I said that was sweet, but I was doing fine. Better than fine. "That's the thing," he said. "We don't think you are. You're out here all alone in this big house. You're, 71? You're buying cars. You're talking about driving across the country by yourself. It's not safe. It's not realistic." I felt something cold start in my stomach. He went on. He had clearly rehearsed it, or she had rehearsed him. I couldn't tell which. He talked about a place. A community, he called it, the way you'd call a kennel a pet resort. Assisted living up near them so they could keep an eye on me. He said it like he was doing me the greatest favor of my life. And then his wife spoke for the first time, and what she said is burned into me forever. She said, "And honestly, it just makes more sense for the house and everything to be handled while you can still be part of the decision, before things get complicated." Handled. The house. While I could still be part of the decision. As though my own dying were already on the calendar, and they were just trying to be efficient about it. I want to tell you I stood up and threw them out. I didn't. I'm ashamed of that, but I'm telling you the truth. And the truth is, I just sat there, because the person saying these things was the baby I'd nursed at 2 a.m, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike on the gravel driveway, and some part of me, the oldest and weakest part, still couldn't believe he meant it, so I said I'd think about it, and they left satisfied, like salesmen who'd gotten a soft maybe. That night I didn't sleep. I sat up in the dark, and I let myself feel the whole shape of it, finally. They didn't want to take care of me. They wanted to take care of the inventory. The house paid off, worth more than my husband and I ever dreamed it would be. The savings, the new car. Me in a facility was just the most convenient place to put the obstacle while they sorted through the assets. And then a strange thing happened. Around 3 a.m, sitting in my husband's old recliner because I couldn't bear the bed, I stopped being sad. I just stopped. And underneath the sad, there was something I hadn't felt in years. I was angry. Clean, clear, useful angry. The kind that gets you out of the chair. The next morning I called a lawyer. Not the old family one my husband had used. The one whose secretary was friendly with my son. A new one, in the next town over. A woman about my daughter's age would have been if I'd had a daughter. I'll call her my attorney because that's all she needs to be in this story. I told her everything. The visit. The community. The word handled. She listened. And when I was done, she took her glasses off and set them down and said, "I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to answer them like the smartest woman in any room you've ever been in, because you are about to need to be." Over the next 3 weeks, quietly, I put my whole life in order. I wrote a new will. The old one left everything to my son, the way these things always do. The new one did not. I sat in that office and I thought about who in this world had actually shown up for me, and the list was short, and it did not have my son at the top. There was the church group. There was a shelter, 2 towns over, that took in old dogs nobody wanted, which my husband had loved, and which had broken my heart a little every time we drove past it. There was a scholarship fund at the community college for women going back to school late in life. I divided the bulk of it among them. I left my son a single $1 and a letter, because my attorney said $1 makes it clear it wasn't an oversight, it was a choice. I moved the savings into accounts in my name alone, with no one else's name attached. No one able to help me manage anything. I put a trust around the house so it could never be sold out from under me. And the car, my beautiful silver car with the sunroof, I made sure the title was clean and clear and mine, and I made a copy of every single document. Then I waited, because I knew they'd come back. People like that always come back. They smell weakness and they circle. They came back on a Friday in June. My son called the night before, oily and warm, saying they wanted to take me out to a nice lunch, just the family. They showed up at 10 in the morning, which is not lunchtime, in their own car, and my son walked into my kitchen, held out his hand and said, "Mom, give me your keys. We're going to drive your new car. Get a feel for it. You really shouldn't be driving something that big anyway." His wife was already looking at the SUV in the driveway through my kitchen window like a woman appraising a ring. And here's the part I'm not proud of, and the part I'd do again in a heartbeat. I smiled. I went and got the keys off the hook by the door, and I handed them over. My son's face did something complicated, surprise and greed and a flicker of guilt all at once, and his wife was already moving for the door. "You two go on," I said. "Take it for a good long drive. Really see what it can do." They didn't even hesitate. They didn't ask why I wasn't coming. That told me everything I needed to know about whether any part of this had ever been about me. His wife got behind the wheel. My son got in the passenger seat of his own mother's car, going to take it from her, and not one of them looked back at me, standing in the doorway in my apron. I watched them pull out of the drive where my husband poured himself. I watched the silver paint catch the morning sun. And then I went inside, sat down at the kitchen table, and I sent my son a text message. 3 words. "Check under the seat." I'd put an envelope there the night before. Inside it was a copy of the new will, with the single dollar and the line of charities. A copy of the deed, now wrapped in a trust his name would never touch. The bank letters showing accounts he had no access to. And a note in my own hand. It said, "I love you. I will always love you. But I am not an estate to be handled. I am your mother, and I am still alive, and I have decided to stay that way on my own terms. The car you are driving is registered to me alone. If you do not return it to my driveway by this afternoon, I will report it as taken without my permission, and I have the paperwork to prove every word of this. Have a safe drive." He called me 40 minutes later. I let it go to voicemail. He called again, and again. The 4th time I picked up, and there was no oil in his voice now. None of it. There was just a man, my boy, breathing hard, saying, "Mom, what is this?" "Mom, please." I told them they could bring my car home, and that we would talk, the 2 of us, just the 2 of us, with his wife waiting in their own vehicle. And to his credit, or maybe just to his shock, that's exactly what happened. They brought the car back that afternoon. His wife sat in their car at the curb with her face like a closed door, and my son came and sat at my kitchen table, where he'd learned to do his homework 40 years before. And for the first time since his father died, we actually talked. I won't tell you it was a beautiful reconciliation, because it wasn't, not that day. He was defensive. He blamed her, which was both true and cowardly. He cried, and some of it was real and some of it was for my benefit, and I'd raised him so I could tell the difference. But I said my piece. I told him I knew exactly what they'd come for. I told him the will was done and it was final and it was not a punishment. It was just the truth of who had earned a place in my life. And I told him the one thing I'd come to understand, sitting alone in that recliner at 3 in the morning. I said, "I love you. I have loved you every single day of your life, and I will love you until the day I die. But I have spent my whole life loving other people first. Your father. You. And I have finally figured out that I'm allowed to love myself too. Both things can be true. I can love you, and I can refuse to let you put me on a shelf." He didn't have an answer for that. There isn't one. Here's what I'll say about the rest of it, because I know it's the part you're wondering about. We are not estranged. But we are not what we were either, and I've made a kind of peace with that. He calls now. Not often. And I notice it always comes right after. Something reminds him I won't be here forever, which tells me his wife is still doing math somewhere in the background. But he calls. And when he does, I keep it short and warm, and I do not, ever again, apologize for the choices I've made about my own life. The car is still mine. The sunroof still works. And this is the part I really wanted to tell you. The reason I sat down to put all this into words in the first place. I drove to the ocean. I left on a Tuesday morning in July, alone, with a thermos of coffee and a paper map I didn't really need, and the radio turned up too loud. It took me 2 days. I stayed in a motel halfway there that smelled like other people's vacations, and I didn't mind it one bit. And on the second afternoon, I came over a rise, and there it was, the whole grey-blue enormousness of it, bigger than anything I'd let myself imagine, and I had to pull over for a minute because I couldn't see the road through my own eyes. I parked. I took off my shoes, 71 years old, in a parking lot full of families, and I walked across the hot sand, and I stood at the edge of the water, and I let it come up over my feet. Cold. Shocking. Real. I stood there a long time. I thought about my husband, and I thought I felt him there, not sad, just glad. Glad I'd finally come. And I thought about all the years I'd spent believing my worth was in what I could hand to other people. A wave came in and pulled the sand out from under my heels, and I laughed out loud, alone, like a fool, like a girl. I was enough. I had always been enough. It just took being threatened with a shelf to make me stand up and prove it. I drove home a different woman than the one who left, and I have not for one single day since, regretted a thing. The thing I keep coming back to, sitting here now with the windows down and the smell of the ocean still somehow in my memory, is that none of what happened to me happened by accident. My son didn't wake up one morning a stranger. I built the road he walked down, one indulgence at a time. Every year I told him the world owed him comfort and never once asked him to earn it. When his wife started doing math over my kitchen table, she was only finishing a lesson I'd started 40 years before. Causes have children of their own, and those children grow up and walk back into your living room and ask for your car keys. I've made my peace with that. I won't pretend my hands were clean, because a person who can't see her own part in things never really learns anything at all. But seeing my part was only the first step, and it's the one I want you to hear most clearly, if you take nothing else from an old woman's story. The night I stopped crying and started thinking, the night I sat in that recliner and got clear-eyed about who'd actually come for me and what they'd actually come for, that was the night everything turned. I didn't scream, I didn't beg. I drove to a lawyer I'd never met, and I asked the careful, unglamorous questions, and I signed the patient paperwork, and I waited. Anger is loud, but the kind of clarity that protects you is quiet. It reads the documents. It keeps copies. It puts the envelope under the seat the night before, not the morning of. There is a sharpness available to us in old age that the young don't have yet, because we've watched how people actually behave instead of how they say they will, and it is a sin to let that sharpness go soft just because someone calls you fragile. And then there's the part that took the most out of me. Harder than the will, harder than the cold ocean on my bare feet. It was staying standing. It would have been so easy to fold, to take the soft maybe back, to let them shelve me where it was convenient and call it love, holding my ground against my own child, the one I'd nursed at 2 a.m. Took more spine than anything I'd done since burying his father. But I held it, and the holding is what made me free. So, if you're old and tired, and someone has started speaking about you in the past tense while you're still in the room, hear me. Look honestly at how you got here, then think before you feel, get your affairs in ironclad order, and refuse, absolutely refuse to be handled. You can love them and still save yourself. Both are true. I drove to the ocean to prove it, and I'd do every mile again.